Well, howdy there, folks. James, Political Friar, coming to you again. Got the Chicago White Sox hat on. One of the greatest moments in history was when they won the World Series in 2005, and so we're going to have a history topic today. And it's a history topic where we're going to employ historical analysis to talk about a political topic that is extremely relevant, and that is political violence. See, I got two comments on my last video, both of which inspired this little talk. The first one was a bit of a flippant challenge. Oh, political violence bad, as if I was not thinking deeply or understanding it well enough, or at least not explaining it thoroughly, which I wasn't because it's a 5-minute video. So I thought I'd go a little deeper into that topic to also answer the second question that I got. So Donald Trump brought this upon himself. Quick answer is a little bit. He did a little bit, and I'll tell you how. Because we understand from the lessons of history what political violence and rhetoric that does anything but unequivocally condemn it does. The mechanism between a politician's words and a supporter or an opponent's actions is well understood. So let's go back to where we really can find a lot of these lessons in history because it's when things really started getting recorded, and that's the fall of the Roman Republic. See, understand that history has happened over and over and over and over again. The reason why we talk about the fall of the Roman Republic is because we had so many people writing about it. We know about the fall of the Roman Republic, so we can use that as a well-sourced episode. And we know more, frankly, about the time period between the first century BC and the end of the first century AD than we know about the 1400s or the 1300s, because there were people writing stuff down. So yeah, those folks out there who say, oh, he's going to talk about Rome, it's not relevant. No, it is relevant because history happens in cycles. And this is just the area that we happen to have a lot of information about. So let's talk about Rome. Rome overthrew its king violently in the 3rd century BC, and a guy named Cincinnatus established the Roman Republic. He's been called the Roman Washington because, much like Washington, he refused to become king. He set up a republic, and he made political violence the most taboo of all taboos. A Roman citizen committing political violence was the worst. Worse than a child rapist was a Roman citizen committing political violence. It was the norm that you don't break. And for 300 years, longer than the American Republic has lasted, the Roman Republic avoided political violence. There were elections every year for executive spots, for administrative spots, and the elections were hardly free and fair. They were filled with bribery, and they were filled with dirty tricks, but they were not filled with violence. It was the one thing that you didn't do, was commit political violence until the 1st century BC. And there were a couple of guys, the Gracchi brothers, as they're what they were called, who embarked upon a populist campaign. They said that the elites in Rome had become too powerful and they dominated the economy too much, and the lower end of the political spectrum wasn't getting their fair share. And they would know because they were elites. They were very much the type of people who were oppressing the plebs, the lower class. They were the most patrician of patrician families. The Gracchi clan had been consuls for generations. And these two guys, in pursuit of their personal political power, mobilized the masses against the elites. And the elites, shockingly, defended themselves. Tiberius Gracchus, the older brother, the guy who really got this going, he broke the violence taboo at a election. At an election, he had his mob attack the vote counters because they were cheating. They were cheating. They were stealing the election from him, and he, instead of tolerating them stealing the election and complaining about it legally, he let his people get into a big old fist fight with clubs, and people died. It was oddly reminiscent of certain Stop the Steal elements. Well, shockingly, the senators, who were the elite class, were in charge. They weren't going to take this sitting down. As soon as the seal was cracked on political violence, the, the, the dam burst. It ended up overwhelming one Tiberius Gracchus when the senators themselves went and disrupted one of Tiberius's campaigns and stabbed him to death. Political violence begat political violence. Well, his younger brother took up the cause of Tiberius, and even though he was a bit more successful in not getting stabbed to death, eventually got stabbed to death because the people that the violent rhetoric is directed towards are going to defend themselves. Shocking, right? Shocking that if you have a politician who is whipping up a crowd to go and lynch somebody, the person who's going to get lynched fights back. We understand that that's how political rhetoric that doesn't even need to encourage political violence, just needs to not unequivocally denounce political violence, will cause political violence, sometimes cause targeting the very person who is failing to denounce it. The politicians throughout history learned this. They learned this through the example of the Gracchi brothers is a good one, but we also can talk about Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar decided that his ambition was more important than the Roman Republic, and he crossed the Rubicon and he started a civil war, and he won the civil war. But the elements of Roman society that he defeated, that is to say, the elites, were not going to take it sitting down. See, Julius Caesar embraced political violence. He launched a full up civil war. He killed thousands of his political rivals. Cato and Cicero and Pompey all were met violent deaths, partially because of Julius Caesar, and not always because Julius Caesar wanted them dead. Pompey is an excellent example of this. Pompey the Great was against Julius Caesar in the Civil War. He escaped a decisive battle, made his way to Egypt, which was not under Roman control at the time, and the Egyptian pharaoh chopped his head off, presented it to Caesar as if, look what a good thing I did. Well, Caesar didn't want Poppy dead. He didn't want the violent the political violence to be perpetrated, but because of his rhetoric, shocking, people took him at his word. It is important to understand that when leaders say things, it isn't about what they mean, it's about what gets heard. And this is a fallacy that is followed us through history, that leaders can somehow control their masses by simply explaining that, no, I don't mean that, even though others hear it. And so Caesar comes back to Rome. He's about to launch a big campaign into Germany, and his stepson, Brutus, stabs him to death. Well, you better believe what happened to Brutus, right? He got stabbed to death. These political violent acts beget political violence. And so Augustus gets things stabilized, but 2 emperors later, Nero is fiddling while Rome burns, and he goes and gets stabbed to death. Wow, political violence is becoming kind of normal. And for the next 200 years, Roman emperors are more likely to be assassinated than die of old age. That is what happens when you normalize violent political rhetoric, is you get violent political actions. Come Diocletian in the 3rd and 4th century BC, and he elevates himself to the status of a living god, something that would be anathema to Augustus, the founder of the Roman Empire. He was the first among equals. Well, Diocletian says, no, I'm an actual god. And you know why? It's because he didn't want to get stabbed to death. He thought people would hesitate to kill a god because of the retribution. And he was right. He died of old age. What a wonderful thing to have happen is the ability to break the cycle of political violence and stop getting stabbed to death. Well, it didn't last long. The Roman emperors who followed Diocletian pretty much went back to getting stabbed to death, and that embrace of political violence lasted through the next 1,000 years. You have people dealing with this idea that violence and regicide is a really efficient way to change things politically throughout all of the medieval time, throughout the early modern time. You have references to it in literature. I mean, go and read the Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, and you'll see this is exactly what he's talking about. Read King Lear. These issues have followed us through the time. Violent rhetoric begets political violence. Now, the King of England at one point in the 1300s is having a fight with Thomas Becket, the Bishop of Canterbury. And the king says, "Would someone not rid me of this meddlesome priest?" And well, lo and behold, his knights take off for Canterbury. And they break into the church and they murder Bishop of Canterbury in his own church. And the king says, "That's not what I meant. I didn't want you to go murder him." Well, man, it's not what you mean when you're in a position of being the leader. It's what people hear. And so leaders have been traditionally very careful with their rhetoric because they don't want political violence to occur, because inevitably political violence will be done unto them. This is a lesson that we have learned through the 19th and through the 20th century. And in the mid 20th century, it became very much the norm that all political actors need to actively condemn political violence. It's not enough to be silent. It's not enough to say, "I didn't mean it." You have to yell and scream. You have to do what Joe Biden and Barack Obama did when they found out that Donald Trump had been shot. You have to deeply, loudly, unequivocally condemn it, and failure to do anything other than that is going to encourage political violence. And so when Donald Trump at the election was asked about the Proud Boys, and he said, "Well, stand by," he failed to unequivocally condemn political violence, and that does beget political violence. When Donald Trump uses rhetoric talking about fight for your country against the scum and the communists and Marxists, yeah, that's going to cause political violence. Not because Donald Trump's calling for political violence, but people hear what he says. There's a guy who went and invaded the FBI office in Cincinnati who got shot to death based off of listening to Donald Trump's rhetoric. Political violence is the natural consequence of violent rhetoric. And so, in that same comment that got this talk started, the commenter brought up Steve Scalise, who got shot by a left wing activist while he was playing baseball. And the implication is, was Donald Trump partially responsible for Steve Scalise getting shot? And the answer is yeah. Yeah, he is. He is, because he's the leader. He decided he wanted to be president. And when he decided he wanted to be president, he also took on the responsibility to not encourage political violence. And he has utterly failed. And there are dead people because of it. January 6th is a direct result of Donald Trump's failure to condemn political violence. He didn't order the attack on the Capitol, but he didn't condemn it. And that is the standard, folks. The norm here is that you must unequivocally condemn political violence to avoid being the victim of political violence. That's why presidents have been so fervent about this. It's not because political violence is bad, Mr. Commentator. It is. It's also because failure to condemn political violence is dangerous for themselves. It's self-preservation that causes wise politicians to condemn political violence wherever it raises its head. Donald Trump is not a wise politician in that regard. And I sure hope that he gets this message, and I doubt that he will. I suspect that his instinct will be to fight and make it worse. And that is bad for all of us. Anyway, it's just a thought. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hit that like button if you don't mind. If you haven't already, subscribe. And we'll talk again soon. Thanks.